The day I found out my brother sold our company, I was sitting in our mother's living room, eating her famous apple pie and listening to her talk about how proud she was of both her boys. She had no idea that 12 hours earlier, Daniel had signed away everything we built together. She had no idea that the company I poured 7 years of my life into, the company that cost me my marriage, my health, and nearly my sanity, had been transferred to a corporation I had never heard of for an amount I would not discover for another 3 weeks. And she certainly had no idea that her oldest son, her golden child, the one she always believed could do no wrong, had committed the single greatest act of betrayal I have ever experienced in my life. My name is Marcus Edwards, and this is the story of how my own brother stabbed me in the back, stole my future, and thought he would get away with it. This is also the story of how I made sure he didn't. Let me take you back to where it all began. Daniel and I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a modest 3-bedroom house with parents who worked themselves to the bone to give us opportunities they never had. Our father, Thomas, was a mechanic who owned a small auto repair shop. Our mother, Linda, was a school secretary. They weren't wealthy, but they raised us to believe that if you worked hard and stuck together as a family, you could achieve anything. Daniel was 4 years older than me, and growing up I worshipped him. He was everything I wasn't: tall, confident, charming in a way that made people naturally gravitate toward him. He was the quarterback on the high school football team, the homecoming king, the guy everyone wanted to be around. I was the quiet one, the kid who stayed in his room building computers from spare parts, the one teachers forgot existed. But Daniel never forgot me. He was my protector, my best friend, the person who made me believe I was worth something even when I doubted myself. When I was 22, fresh out of college with a computer science degree and absolutely no idea what to do with my life, Daniel came to me with an idea. He had been working in sales for a medical equipment company and noticed a massive gap in the market. Healthcare providers were struggling with outdated software systems that didn't communicate with each other. Patient records were getting lost, appointments were being missed, and billing errors were costing hospitals millions. Daniel saw the problem. I had the skills to solve it. We spent 6 months planning, arguing, and dreaming. I wrote the initial code in my tiny apartment, surviving on ramen noodles and 4 hours of sleep a night. Daniel handled everything else. He found our first investors, pitched to potential clients, and secured the small business loan that allowed us to officially launch Edwards Health Solutions in the spring of 2015. Those first 2 years were brutal. We worked out of a cramped office space above a Chinese restaurant, the smell of fried rice permanently embedded in our clothes. I was the entire technical department, writing code, fixing bugs, and handling customer support. Daniel was sales, marketing, and public relations all rolled into one. We fought constantly about money, about strategy, about who was pulling their weight. But at the end of every argument, we would look at each other, remember why we started this, and get back to work. By 2017, something started to shift. Our software was finally gaining traction. We landed a contract with a mid-sized hospital network in Cleveland that changed everything. Suddenly, we had real revenue. We hired our first employees. We moved into an actual office with windows and furniture that wasn't salvaged from thrift stores. I remember the day Daniel and I stood in that empty office space looking out at the city skyline, and he put his arm around me and said, "We did it, little brother. We actually did it." I believed him. I believed in us. By 2019, Edwards Health Solutions had grown beyond anything we could have imagined. We had 43 employees, contracts with hospital networks across the Midwest, and annual revenue approaching $12 million. Industry publications were calling us one of the most innovative healthcare technology startups in the region. Venture capitalists were circling, smelling the potential for something much bigger. That was also the year my marriage fell apart. My wife, Sarah, had been patient for longer than anyone could reasonably expect. She spent too many nights alone while I was at the office. She attended too many family events by herself while I was putting out fires with clients. When she finally told me she was leaving, she said something I will never forget. She said, "You chose the company over me. You chose Daniel over me, and now you have to live with that." She was right. I had given everything to Edwards Health Solutions. I had sacrificed my personal life, my health, and my happiness because I believed we were building something meaningful. I believed Daniel and I were in this together. I believed that all the sacrifices would be worth it in the end. I was a fool. The first sign that something was wrong came in early 2021. Daniel had been acting differently for months. He was taking more meetings alone, being vague about potential investors, and becoming irritated whenever I asked too many questions about the business side of things. I told myself he was just stressed. We were in the middle of negotiations with a major investor group, and the pressure was immense. I trusted Daniel to handle the business development while I focused on what I did best, building and improving our product. Then, in March of that year, Daniel called a meeting with me in his office. He closed the door, sat me down, and told me he had been approached by a company called Meridian Ventures. They were interested in acquiring Edwards Health Solutions for what Daniel described as a life-changing amount of money. He said it was the opportunity of a lifetime, that we would be set for the rest of our lives, that we could finally reap the rewards of everything we had sacrificed. I asked him for details. He was evasive. He said negotiations were in the early stages, that he would keep me informed as things progressed. He assured me that any decision would be made together, as partners, as brothers. I walked out of that meeting with an uneasy feeling in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. This was Daniel, the person who had believed in me when no one else did. He would never betray me. Over the following months, Daniel kept me at arm's length. Whenever I asked about Meridian Ventures, he said things were ongoing or complicated. He started taking mysterious phone calls that required him to leave the room. He scheduled meetings with lawyers and financial advisors that I wasn't invited to. When I confronted him about being left out of major decisions, he accused me of being paranoid and controlling. "You handle the code," he said during one particularly heated argument. "Let me handle the business. That's how it's always worked." But it wasn't how it had always worked. In the early days, we made every major decision together. We were equals, partners, brothers building something from nothing. Somewhere along the way, Daniel had decided he was something more than a partner. He had decided he was in charge. The week before everything fell apart, I received a strange email. It was from a woman named Patricia Donovan, an attorney at a law firm I didn't recognize. The email was brief and professional, congratulating me on the successful transaction and requesting my signature on some final paperwork related to the Edwards Health Solutions acquisition. I read it 3 times, my heart rate increasing with each pass. I called Patricia Donovan's office immediately. When I explained who I was, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Mr. Edwards, according to our records, you transferred your shares to your brother 8 months ago. You were fully aware of and consented to this acquisition. Is there a problem?" I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I managed to ask her what she meant by transferred my shares, and she explained that documents on file showed I had voluntarily signed over my 50% ownership of Edwards Health Solutions to Daniel Edwards in exchange for a nominal payment. Those documents bore my signature. According to the legal record, I had willingly given up my stake in the company I had spent 7 years building. The room started spinning. I hung up the phone without another word and sat in my home office, staring at the wall, trying to process what I had just heard. It wasn't possible. I had never signed any such documents. I had never agreed to transfer my shares. Daniel couldn't have sold the company without me, because I owned half of it. Except apparently, according to someone's carefully manufactured paper trail, I didn't own anything at all. I drove to Daniel's house that night. I didn't call ahead. I didn't think about what I would say. I just got in my car and drove, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, my mind racing through every possible explanation that didn't end with my brother being a thief and a liar. When Daniel opened the door, I saw it immediately. The guilt. For just a fraction of a second, before he arranged his face into an expression of innocent confusion, I saw the guilt flash across his features. He knew why I was there. He knew what I had discovered. "Marcus," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "What are you doing here? It's almost midnight." I pushed past him into the house. Rachel, his wife, was standing at the top of the stairs in her bathrobe, looking down at us with an expression I couldn't read. I ignored her. I turned to face my brother, the person I had trusted more than anyone else in the world, and I asked him one simple question. "What did you do, Daniel?" He tried to play innocent at first. He acted confused, asked me what I was talking about, suggested I might be overtired or stressed, but I wasn't interested in his performance. I told him about the call with Patricia Donovan. I told him about the documents claiming I had transferred my shares. I told him I knew something was very wrong, and I needed him to explain it to me right now. That's when the mask finally slipped. Daniel's posture changed, his expression hardened. He straightened up and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not guilt, not shame, annoyance, like I was a child who had interrupted an important adult conversation with a silly question. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," he said. Those words hit me like a physical blow. I asked him what that meant. I demanded to know what he had done. And slowly, piece by piece, Daniel told me the truth. Or at least a version of the truth that he thought would make him look like the reasonable one. He told me that Meridian Ventures had made an offer of $32 million for Edwards Health Solutions. He told me that he had decided the best course of action was to accept the offer quickly before they changed their minds or found another company to acquire. He told me that he had consulted with lawyers and financial advisors who had helped him structure the deal in a way that was simpler and cleaner for tax purposes. I asked him where my half of the $32 million was. He looked at me like I had asked a stupid question. "Marcus," he said slowly, as if explaining something to a child, "you were a minority contributor to this company's success. I brought in every client. I secured every investment. I made every deal. The code you wrote was important, sure, but it was my vision, my relationships, my business acumen that made this company worth anything. The compensation you've received fairly reflects your actual contribution." I asked him what compensation he was talking about. I asked him when I had supposedly agreed to any of this. I asked him about the documents with my forged signature. Daniel smiled then, a cold, empty smile that I will remember for the rest of my life. "You signed power of attorney years ago," he said. "Back when we incorporated. You probably don't even remember. You were so busy with the technical stuff, you just signed whatever I put in front of you. That power of attorney gave me the legal authority to act on your behalf in business matters. Everything I did was perfectly legal." The room felt like it was closing in on me. I thought back to those early days, to the endless paperwork Daniel had handed me, to the times he had said, "Just sign this, it's standard incorporation stuff," while I was buried in code and barely paying attention. I had trusted him completely. I had never questioned anything. "How much?" I managed to ask. "How much did you give me?" Daniel's smile widened slightly. $250,000. Deposited into your account last week. Generous, really, considering your actual equity contribution to the company. $250,000 out of $32 million. Less than 1% of the sale price for the company I had built from the ground up. I don't remember exactly what happened next. I know there was shouting. I know Rachel came downstairs and started screaming at me to leave her house. I know Daniel threatened to call the police if I didn't calm down. Eventually, I left. I drove home in a daze, unable to process the magnitude of what had just happened. My brother had stolen my company. He had forged documents, manipulated legal loopholes, and sold everything we built together without giving me a dime of what I was owed. And he had done it all while sitting across from me at family dinners, looking me in the eye and pretending to be my partner and my friend. The next few weeks were the darkest of my life. I barely slept. I barely ate. I spoke to lawyers who told me that fighting this in court would be extremely difficult and expensive. Daniel had covered his tracks well. The power of attorney document was real. My signature was on it, even if I didn't remember signing it. Proving fraud or forgery after the fact would require extensive forensic investigation, and even then, success was not guaranteed. I thought about giving up. I thought about taking the $250,000 and walking away, accepting that I had been outmaneuvered by someone smarter and more ruthless than me. I thought about disappearing, moving somewhere new, and trying to forget that Edwards Health Solutions had ever existed. But then I thought about those 7 years. I thought about the sleepless nights, the broken marriage, the holidays I missed, the friendships I neglected. I thought about every line of code I had written, every bug I had fixed at 3 in the morning, every time I had pushed through exhaustion because I believed in what we were building. And I thought about my brother's smile, that cold, empty smile when he told me I had been fairly compensated. No, I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to let Daniel Edwards enjoy the fruits of my labor while I faded into obscurity. I was going to find a way to expose him for what he really was. I was going to make sure he faced consequences for what he had done to me. I just had to figure out how. The first step was finding an ally. I reached out to an old college friend named James Mitchell, who had become a corporate lawyer in Chicago. James and I had stayed loosely in touch over the years, but we weren't close enough for Daniel to know about him. When I called James and explained what had happened, he agreed to meet with me immediately. James reviewed everything: the incorporation documents, the power of attorney, the sale paperwork I had managed to obtain through public records requests. His face grew more troubled with each page he read. Finally, he looked up at me and delivered his verdict. "Your brother is smart," he said. "He didn't do anything obviously illegal. Everything is technically within the bounds of the authority you gave him. But there are cracks here, Marcos. Small cracks, but enough to work with." He pointed to the power of attorney document. It was dated from 2015, the year we incorporated. But something about it looked wrong. The formatting was different from other documents I had signed at that time. The signature looked slightly off. Not obviously forged, but not quite right either. "If we can prove this document was backdated or modified after the fact," James said, "everything falls apart. The share transfer becomes fraudulent. The sale becomes voidable. Daniel doesn't just lose his money, he faces potential criminal charges." It was a long shot, but it was something. James connected me with a forensic document examiner named Dr. Linda Hoffman. She specialized in detecting forged signatures, backdated documents, and other forms of documentary fraud. I sent her the power of attorney along with samples of my genuine signature from that time period. Then I waited. While I waited, I started digging into Daniel's life in ways I had never bothered to do before. When we were building the company together, I had taken him at his word about everything. I trusted his explanations about finances, about investor relationships, about the state of the business. Now I approached everything with new eyes. What I discovered made me sick. Daniel's lifestyle had changed dramatically over the past 2 years. He and Rachel had bought a new house, a massive 5-bedroom mansion in an expensive suburb. They drove luxury cars. They took vacations to Europe and the Caribbean. Rachel wore jewelry that cost more than I made in a year. I had assumed all of this was financed through Daniel's legitimate share of the company profits. Now I wasn't so sure. I obtained records showing that Daniel had been paying himself a significantly higher salary than what was recorded in the company books. He had also been billing personal expenses to the company for years. Luxury dinners, expensive gifts for Rachel, even a boat that was supposedly for client entertainment. None of this had ever been disclosed to me. Then I found something even more damaging. Through a contact James had at the Ohio Secretary of State's office, I discovered that Daniel had secretly incorporated a second company called DE Consulting Group 2 years before the sale. This company had been receiving substantial payments from Edwards Health Solutions for consulting services that, as far as I could tell, were never actually rendered. Essentially, Daniel had been funneling money out of our company into his own pocket for years. It wasn't just the sale. Daniel had been stealing from me the entire time. Dr. Hoffman's report arrived 3 weeks after I submitted the documents. Her findings were exactly what I had hoped for. The power of attorney document showed clear signs of digital manipulation. The signature had been lifted from another document and digitally pasted onto this one. The metadata from the original file showed it had been created not in 2015, but in late 2020, just months before the sale negotiations began. Daniel had forged the power of attorney. He had fabricated the legal authority he needed to sell my shares, and now I had proof. I could have gone straight to the police at that point. I could have filed a lawsuit immediately, but I didn't. I wanted more. I wanted Daniel to feel the same fear and helplessness he had made me feel. I wanted him to watch his perfect life crumble around him, piece by piece, with no idea where the attacks were coming from.